Hi. We're going to talk about analytics today, but we're going to look at it a bit closely and look at the humans behind the analytics. Like Seth said, I'm Randall, and this is Elizabeth. And we live in Dublin, and we work for iqcontent, which is a user experience design agency in Dublin, and also for Mapped, which is a blog, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So I want to start with a metaphor. And the reason is that when I'm presented with a lot of analytics data, it looks to me as like a sea of information. It's just a ton of stuff that I have to look at, and I have to sort of sift through it and figure out what I want to do with that. First, what I want to pay attention to, and then how I'm going to shape it. So we're going to start, say, with the ocean. So if you were tasked with classifying everything inside the ocean, where would you start? Because it's huge. So you had to make a comprehensive list of everything that was inside the ocean. So you could start, say, making a list of all the organisms or the animals within the ocean. So you could do whales or jellyfish or sharks or amorous starfish. Or you could look at how the ocean and people interact. So you could look at, say, the beach or ships or submarines. Or you could see the fantasy in the ocean, like mermaids. Or things that are, say, disappearing in the ocean, like coral reef or icebergs. You could look at fishermen, pirates, seagulls. You could go on and on and on, but you probably have to start somewhere and think of how you're going to attack that. I'm going to pass it to you.
So there are a lot of things in the ocean. There's a lot of data out there that we have to deal with. And what we like to think about as content strategists is what are the stories we can tell with that data. So looking back at the ocean metaphor, we could talk about Moby Dick. We could talk about modern stories like Titanic, movies, The Hunt for Red October, The Birds, Little Mermaid, or we could look at real-life stories like the fishing industry or the Gulf oil spill. And of course, one of the greatest storytellers about the ocean is David Attenborough, seen in his natural habitat there. So our point is that disparate data can show us an infinite amount of stories, or if not infinite, a great number. And what we have to do as brands and as publishers online is decide what story we want to tell with that data. And I'm just going to tell two short stories about a client I worked with in Ireland and the stories we tried to tell to sell their products. So the first one was the iPhone, and this was really about the introduction of the iPhone to Ireland, which happened a little bit later than it happened over here, so we got to learn from mistakes that were made and good things that happened as well. And Apple really they sell by telling a story. They're a great example of a brand that sells by telling a very strong story about their product. But it's kind of interesting to think about whether, we want the phone because of the story that they tell and the strength of the brand, or whether we want it because of the product that it just is. Is it the way they sell, or is it the product itself that's selling it? Now, our client, which was a telecommunications provider as well, also sold phones, so a good example there, but they really didn't follow the same process at all. They gave very small chunks of content. A lot of this was automatically produced, so machine-produced content that was pulled out of a particular tool to provide these different lists of features about a particular phone. But there wasn't a lot of additional content to sort of support the customer and tell them what they needed to know before they buy. In the case of most standard phones, that's fine. People just want to make a comparison. The phones aren't that different, and they can just make a buy decision themselves. But it really wasn't working that well for the website. And because Ireland is a little bit behind, they were still having to prove to their bosses the value of the online channel. It wasn't just that people were like, yes, online is worthwhile. They still had to go into their own sales teams and say, give us this money rather than sending it to retail, because online is still valuable, because they really weren't hitting their targets in terms of e-commerce. This snapshot was taken a month prior to the iPhone launch, and that is actually when they called us in to actually put together a new section to sell the iPhone on their website, and they said, complete carte blanche, do something completely different, don't make it anything like what's there now because it's not working. But a month obviously is not a lot of time to build a new section on a website. But you might think it's an easy sell, it's the iPhone, but it really wasn't that easy, because we were really starting from the beginning with a limited time. As usual, if anyone works on websites, that's kind of how it happens every time. So we looked at historical data. Now, we wanted to do something completely different, so we had to take the data that we had and really analyze it, use our expertise to think about what we could do with this data to improve the next experience that we were going to give to our customers. Now, I will say that we didn't just rely on analytics data. We also did a lot of user testing. So we relied on both of those things to come up with a final solution, or the next solution. So we knew that we had always lost people who were moving from the brochureware part of the site, where they were just reading text, looking at video, and so on, to the actual purchase funnel. And from that data, we were able to make certain deductions. And one was that people don't like to be herded. They do not like to be forced to buy before they are ready to buy. If you walk into a store and somebody approaches you too soon and you're not ready to buy, or you don't have questions to ask, you will back away. It's a very kind of careful and precise sort of psychological situation, even when you're online. So what we were doing at the time in the online store was we were actually making people choose what type of customer they were before they buy. It's a common situation on a lot of e-commerce sites. But it was a really complex series of questions that we were asking them. We weren't just saying, do you want to pay by the month or do you want to pay as you go? We were saying exactly who are you and have you ever had a phone before and have you ever been with our company before and do you have broadband in your house as well? All these complicated questions and people just really, really hated it. It's just a little bit of a close-up there. And you can see that we worked on the language. We tried to make it more human, speak with the I language instead of the customer language. But people still disliked it. When we put people down sat people down in user tests, they understood why we were asking, but they still hated it, and they still said, this would stop me. If I was on my own, I would not actually go in. So we were in a situation, we had a month, and we couldn't redesign the system. We could not do away with this back-end requirement, which is simply just to tell people what price they should actually show for each phone. So what could we do? We could put more persuasive content around it. Yes, absolutely we could. We could do a magical redesign, but content alone will not solve this problem. So we really needed to work together with our analytics expert and with the user experience team to design a section that used content to its best purpose and to make sure that every word really counted. So we have a collaborative team, an agile sort of design methodology that we follow, where myself, the content strategist, works with the analytics expert and the user experience designer. And in a really kind of lo-fi, analog, just people in a room situation, we map out the user journeys that we want to follow, and we apply personas. Personas are archetypes of our users. We had about 15 of them for this project. And they're based on user testing, so they're based on real-life examples as well. And we just come up with the best possible solution we can think of based on the data that we have, the user testing that we've done, and we aggregate all of that together and design something new. And then we keep testing it. That's kind of the process that we follow. There is no silver bullet solution, if you like, that can solve all these problems other than just redesigning and tweaking our content as we go. So the solution that we came up with in this case was one that deviated from what I would have, told people in countless writing for the web classes, which is, reduce the amount of content you're giving people online, don't give them too much, they'll feel overloaded, they won't buy. People actually need a lot of information, but it's how that information is designed, how you show it to them, what volume of information you give to them at a certain time. And what we found is that people really wanted to do this circular process. They wanted to go through the section time after time, kind of not pogo stick back and forth from page to page, but circle through their particular channel and then be able to buy from any position on the page. They didn't want to have to go through the channel that we decided they should go through. They wanted to find their own path. And that's what we tried to design for them. We also tried to give them more in terms of after-sales content. And I was interested to hear about, I think it was Anthony talked about the CRM solution. I did a much more lo-fi version of that, which was just happened to be that when people went into retail stores to buy the phone, there were so many people going in and buying when it was first released that they were selling like 2,000 a day, and they were having to sell them unactivated. So they were telling people, pick up the phone, call customer support, and they'll tell you how to actually put your SIM card in your phone, because if you've never had an iPhone before, it's a little bit different than a standard phone. But of course, there were so many people calling that they were having long call waits, and people were frustrated and angry. And I said, well, look, we have a video on the website that actually shows people how to do this. They had no idea. The people, the dots weren't being connected. So I was in a meeting with him, and I said, okay, look, we're going to put this content really front and center so that people can find it if they go to the website on their own, but also tell the retail guys that it's there and tell them to go online rather than pick up the phone. So, there's lots of things that you can do with your data. I call it like the data of talking to people, just going out and talking to your different departments and seeing where those questions actually have already been answered. This just shows a kind of a gradual peak over time. That height there is about 100,000 page views that we had. The section is it's still being designed and redesigned. It's constantly being tweaked, and that's really the process that we follow. It's kind of a content strategy shows us the direction that we want to go in, which is a content-heavy sort of Apple-like sales approach on the website. This was actually a test case that the website is now fully going toward, but we always follow kind of a tactical approach where we apply analytics to the content and see how we can actually improve things week by week even. So we're constantly making changes based on that with the client. So that was like an easy sell, if you like. The product is a very, sexy product to sell. It should be really easy, lots of nice pictures. A harder sell is broadband, and this was around the same time last year, early 2009, that we came in to help them out with this. The product had been in existence for this client for about 6 months. They had purchased another broadband company. They used to just sell mobile phones, but now they were going into the fixed market. And they really were having not a lot of luck with it at all. Part of the problem is, of course, that broadband in Ireland is incredibly slow, and people just didn't want to buy it because it wasn't very good. But in the 6 months, they had something like 12% of their visitors, only about 1,600 actually converted online, actually bought online. So we knew that people were interested enough to come to the site, but they weren't buying, so we had a problem to solve. And of course, this meant that our client was having to go into their sales team again, and there was a lot of red there, and that's bad, and that reflected badly on the e-commerce team, and so on. So it was really a case of let's prove that e-commerce can actually work for this client. We had a particular problem with this product in that, this product, we had to sell by speed, this broadband, 3 megabytes per second, 7 megabytes per second, as I said, really, really slow in Ireland. But we weren't allowed to talk about speed legally. So we had to sell a product that was about speed, but we could not say the word fast or speed in the web content. If anybody out there is a web editor, you'll understand that this kind of thing happens all the time. This was the landing page they had when we first started. So they actually had 7 products. Randall will talk a little bit later about choice and product design and how we often have to influence our clients to limit the number of choice that they're giving to customers because it actually can deter people from making a decision. And they also had a lot of different sales messages going on at the top and the side. And this was simply the product owner trying desperately anything that they could do to make this product move. But as you can see, there's a lot of numbers going on, 10%, €35, 20%, and it's just all shouting, and there's nothing clear is getting through to the customer. We had a lot of information about the product, but it was hidden in a light box that appeared, and it wasn't easy to get to. And it was also designed in a kind of a fussy, not very well, the graphic design was terrible. So we looked at a bunch of things. We were doing this very tactically. We worked over a series of about 3 to 4 weeks, I think, on this project. And we looked at referring sites. Because it was a new product for the company, we found that people were still going to the old company website, so I think it was BT Ireland at the time, and they were purchased by this company. So people weren't aware that Vodafone sold broadband. So there was a learning curve there to actually reach out to the audience and tell them, like, this is actually happening. So advertising could definitely have helped there, whether it's, offline banner advertising, that kind of thing, or whether it's online as well. We looked at page exits, so for visits to the site that included this page, the page exits from this page were 36%, which was quite high. So we knew people were coming to this page, looking around, and then leaving. They weren't proceeding beyond it. We felt that people couldn't get past this page, and we user tested that, and we found that that was the case. People would come to the page, and they would look around, and they'd be like, I don't know what the next step is. I don't know where I go to buy. We looked at external search terms, and we found that people were searching for Vodafone, and they were coming, and they were finding broadband. But that didn't tell us that much. The really damning evidence was on our own internal search, and I think this is one of the most valuable things when you're a content editor is to look at your internal search logs. Because it's what people look for when they come to your site that they can't find. It shows you all sorts of things about your information architecture and how well it's working, and also about your organic SEO. The word broadband was not bringing up this page, which was the most important page for broadband on the website. It was actually not coming up on the first page at all. And that had to do with the way the page was set up semantically. The actual HTML behind the page was just not structured appropriately. The keyword was not where it was supposed to be. So that was, a huge thing. That was the first thing that we actually fixed for them, and there was a huge jump after that. And it was so easy to do, but it was because they hadn't actually gone and looked at this data. So we had a lot of things that we had to think about. Were we using the right keywords? Were people actually comfortable with the jargon that we were using? We think that people understand mobile broadband versus wireless broadband, but do they actually understand that? Does a grandmother living in the west of Ireland know the difference? We might know the difference. And can people tell the difference between the plans? Can actually people make a comparison between the different plans and make a decision to buy? So we decided there was a lot of content there, but it was very bloated. There was a lot that we could reuse. We didn't have to rewrite a lot, but it was just about how it was distributed and how it was designed that made the difference. So you can see we did not redesign the website. To do this, we stuck with the existing design, but we made it a lot cleaner, a lot more white space. And we made sure that there was a full page for every plan where people actually were told, this is why this plan matters for you, rather than them being forced to figure out, what the speed meant for them and what that actually, could give them. And we also made sure that this was the step that was stopping people from getting past the page. Sorry, I have a bit of a sore throat today as well, which was just to test your landline for speed. We made sure that people didn't have to hunt for that in the page, that it actually popped up whenever they clicked buy now. And we saw an immediate increase. the changes were made there, as you can see, very nicely annotated. And there was a really nice peak just after that, but also a slow incline, which is really what we wanted to see, that there was just a gradual improvement over time. We were also, as I said, grappling with people understanding that this company actually sold broadband, so competing with the fact that they were understood to just sell one product and then they were now moving into a new market. But I think the real testament to it is that there was no advertising to support this, and there was still a 100% increase in sales. So it was really, really valuable, I think, even emotionally for the team that we were working with, for the client's appreciation of what we were able to do. I think it was really, really great. So our point really today is about the fact that analytics is about gathering a body of evidence and finding patterns in that data, and you can't really replace, as Rachel was saying, it's not all automated. You can't replace the human impact, the expertise that you can bring to bear on content, and actually redistributing it appropriately is what it's all about. So I'll hand you over to Randall, and she'll talk a bit about another project.
So this is a very different project. We were selling health insurance. And it immediately brought up, are we going to sell it by the actual policy and all the elements of the policy, or are we going to sell it by the person who needs it, which is, of course, much, much harder. So the actual project was to design a health insurance funnel. And a funnel just means a set amount of pages from the beginning to the end, which is buying. So we had to explain health insurance quite clearly, and we had to also make it very easy for someone to buy it. So we started it with an analytics report, and I'm just going to share some of the data that we found in their old funnel because it was a redesign. So a very, very small amount of people actually bought. When they start the funnel, only about 1% of people actually finished the funnel, and most of them stepped out between the first and second page. The whole site had 7 different funnels. People were just dispersed everywhere, and that wasn't a cumulative 1%. It was just there was 1% across all funnels. The conversion rates were highest at night and on the weekends, particularly 9 p.m. There was a lot of pogo sticking, which means going back and forth between the pages. So people were just going to one page and then going back again, and that's clearly because they were trying to compare plans, because they couldn't see any type of comparison. Most of the people that bought were young, were between 20 and 39. And more than half of the search terms were about specific health information. So it was about, like, people were searching for pregnancy because they were about to have a baby and they wanted to see how the health insurance plan would affect them, as opposed to Plan X and to see and to find pregnancy within the X. And then this wasn't from the actual site itself, but this is a TED Talk by Barry Schwartz talking about the paradox of choice, which means his point was that the more choice you give people, the less they actually choose. So he used a mutual fund company as an example. And for every 10 mutual funds an employer would present to an employee, the rate of participation would go down by 2%. So if you offered 50, you'd think that's great, but really fewer people would choose than if you offered 5. So we took all that data, and then we did the same type of thing that Elizabeth did. It was me and a user experience designer to design this funnel, and we'd made 3 major design decisions based on the data. And the first one was we divided the content by persona, and a persona is an archetypal user. It's not a demographic, it's just a person based on their behavior that you're designing for. We wrote a lot of explanatory text, and we designed the information for ease of comparison. So what did that look like, and why do we make those decisions? So we divided the content by persona because people were searching for stuff they cared about. So you don't really care about everything in your health plan until you break your leg and you really need to know how much they cover your hospital costs. It's really only, health insurance information is really specifically relevant. So what did that look like? That looked like this. This is just a diagram from our wireframes. So the first step divides you into what type of person you are. So you can see you go directly into if you're a young single person under a certain age, if you're a young family, and then you see content relevant to you based on who you are, which we collect in the beginning from date of birth. We wrote a lot of explanatory text, and that's because people just weren't buying, which meant they were really confused. And health insurance is a very big, confusing product, and it's very emotional as well. So when you're confused, you're not going to finish. So that looked like this. Again, this is from a wireframe. So it was explaining things like, what does private room mean? But it also explains, like, this is only one part of your plan, there are other parts here. And that explained stuff so people understood what it actually meant, but it also was a more nuanced reason to comfort them as well, to be like, any question you have, we can answer it, so there's no sort of angst as you're deciding to buy. And the third design decision was to design for ease of comparison, and that was sort of, and the navigation summary and the pogo sticking I was talking about before, is people really needed to compare, but they were going back and forth, and because there was so much information on one page, they couldn't retain it to remember to compare to the last one, so we really needed people to see it at a glance. And so that looked like this. You could see 3 choices, and one is sort of bubbled up. It's sort of in the middle ground price. You can see the price and the part of the insurance that you care about, and you can compare all 3, exactly what you get. So really, design is a balance of data, because you can't use everything. You can't use all the analytics that you get. For example, we pretty much ignored the fact that people converted mostly at night. The only reason they did that is that you need a lot of time to buy a health insurance plan. You can't do it while you're at work. But it's also a balance of the actual data that you have. You can't present everyone everything at once. You can't just give them everything that happens in your health plan, because they might not care about all of it, and it's just too much information. So it's really good to pick and do a lot less. So I'm going to move on now to how analytics can inform your strategy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and about Elizabeth. We have a blog, as many people do, I think, and it's very young. And the blog was very selfish, because this is our strategy, was we want to write for ourselves. And really it was just a place for us to be a little more creative and to talk about content strategy and storytelling outside of the context of our work. So writing for ourselves meant doing things like this, like we wrote a blog post called A Feature-Length Movie in 3 Bullet Points. This is one of the first ones. And we wrote it because we went to see this movie. Elizabeth and I and another friend went to see this movie, which, if you haven't seen it, it's a dance movie, and it's in 3D, and it's also a love story. And it's really bad, but it's also funny. And we went and had a drink afterwards, and we decided that we were going to write a sequel set in Ireland. So there was going to be like a dance-off on the cliffs of Moher. But we really nerded out and got really into it, and started mapping the 3 plot lines and how they interacted and like where they ended, and then we started talking about like the formula for most like bad movies, and we wrote about it, and so we liked it, but really it wasn't sort of giving people like, here's how you write a movie. It was just exploring ideas, and it didn't get like a ton of views. It got like enough, but like people that we in content strategy industry tweeted it, and we were happy, and that's how we measured our success, was who was reading it and who was responding to it. And then Elizabeth wrote a post, which she's about to talk about, that was sort of had a different approach.
Yeah, no, good. Thanks. Yeah, so that was kind of a case of we just went out and did something silly, and it got a good response. And really, our purpose in doing this was to connect with other people in our industry, which is a really small industry. And Seth was saying, it's we're coming all the way from Europe to talk at this conference, and why do we do that? Well, it's because content strategy is so new, and we're trying to sort of evangelize it a little bit and talk about it worldwide. But it's so small that everybody in the world kind of knows each other. So it's quite interesting to see how those conversations happen. But I wrote a post a few weeks ago about, which was kind of an indirect response to somebody saying content strategy doesn't make any sense and isn't valid. And I said, I had a conversation with another colleague, I was in London at the time, about that very same thing, and about other related issues, about how when a new niche industry comes up, people really want to define what it is right away, and it can become quite bureaucratic and quite political and quite funny as well, and how that kind of happens. So I just wrote this piece about what I thought, my conception of what content strategy was, and why I thought these conversations or these arguments really don't serve much purpose. And it got a huge response for us, 481. It was like, these numbers are so gratifying to see, but what we're trying to talk about today is how you have to step back from those numbers and think about what they actually mean. We had, 1,200% viewership rise. It was great. We were really happy. We clapped and everything. But I drew a metaphor in the post that I actually wrote about how having a website of any kind, whether it's a blog or a sales website, is being a publisher. You are a publisher, and having a content strategy is about deciding what kind of publisher you want to be. So, for example, an editor will have a strategy for the year. They will have a plan about what they're going to produce. They will have a plan for, the lifestyle section and the sports section and all these things that they can actually, predict what's going to happen. But things will still happen that are unpredictable, and you will respond to those. And that's what analytics is so great for, is that it helps us respond to things that are actually happening, as opposed to just being outward looking and pushing things out to our customer. We can actually find out things that they are happening from the inside. But it's how we respond to those things that defines who we are as a brand and what our content strategy actually is. So how we actually respond to any kind of event, all newspapers respond to these events, but there's a difference between how the Daily Mail will respond versus, the Times of London or the New York Times or the New York Post. And that's what a strategy is really all about. So really my point is that analytics is not just a numbers game, it's a means for us to actually evaluate what is happening. And a lot of it is, it's really having a psychological insight into how people work, and I think it's really important to marry it with things like user testing, where you're actually there with your customers as well, and to not just do any one thing independently. But really it's just about quality versus quantity. That would be our message. I was going to talk a little bit more about that.
It's good to look at your, like for example, to look at your search terms in terms of to really examine the quality versus quantity question. So for example, these are the search terms, and by the way, these are just WordPress stats. To look at the search terms, people that got to our blog. So one of them was said, I don't know if you can read it, it says fairy tale slide template. So they were looking for something really specific, and they needed it. And they came to our blog because we used a fairy tale metaphor. I think the word fairy tale was in there. So they wouldn't really get anything from our blog. Perhaps they would, but they were looking for something really specific. On the other hand, someone else Googled bullet points on how to end a story. Well, we talk a lot about storytelling and like the structure of how to write a story or how to tell a story, and they could get something from it. So when we look at this, we shouldn't be like, oh my God, there's a big fairy tale contingent, and we're going to start writing about fairy tales. We shouldn't be reactive with the way that we interpret our data. We should just look at it and see how it goes, and know that because we write words, particularly in blogs where you just write, it's all text. People are going to pick up lots of words in there, and to just look at the ones that you really care about and see how you can incorporate that in there. And this is just my favorite search term that someone came to our site, and I hope we delivered the hilarity. But really, analytics is about language, because you can look at all the numbers and you can look at the changing numbers and you can look at the percentages, but really there are people behind it. There are people using words that quantify into numbers. There's a language on your page, there's the page titles, and you need to look deeper than just than the percentages, because there can be a big number that you really shouldn't even care about, that you should dismiss, because the words behind it are not relevant to what you're trying to do or what audience you're trying to reach. So that's it. If there are any questions, let us know. No? Oh, yeah.
What's your blog?
Oh, it's called Mapped.
Map?
Yeah, it's mappedblog.com. We like maps.
In your slide, you showed cutting down the number of options, but you also showed a default for an option. How do those two play against each other? Is it best to have defaults as well as cutting down, or can you have more options if you have better defaults?
Are you talking about the choices in the health insurance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because 3 is, you can handle that. And also because when you have to make a choice, then there has to be choice available. So there were lots of health insurance plans that this company were selling. And so that was part of them. We only had a really short amount of time to redesign the funnel, so we couldn't say you need to redesign all your products and cut it down, although we did say that to them. But we did need to present the choice, because people are making a really big decision and they want to know how much they have to pay each month and what they're actually going to get when something happens. So it's really just about the number of choices.
But with the Vodafone, you were also sort of making one very prominent in the centre and bolding it. Did that make a big difference? Or
Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, that's interesting. The Vodafone when we had 7, and I think what you're saying is, yeah, there is it like, could we have 7 if we had made 2 the default, or said these 2 are the best or whatever? And I think, yeah, you probably could. I think there's probably an optimal number. I'd say like pushing it above 7 would be kind of hard, or you'd want to group them together. So you could have like 3 basic plans and 3 middle plans. But I think it's about that structuring it off so that people know where they need to go. And I think, I mean, I can't call out a statistic or a data point on it, but I know that I've read lots of things where, 3 to 4 is really what people can absorb so that they can actually compare if you like, a basic, middle, and then premium. I'm sorry, yeah. Did you get any of that, or do you want me to repeat? Okay, sorry. I can hear myself so well. I was just saying that if you want to actually compare sort of having a lot of plans versus having a few, I think you can have a few. Maybe going above 7 would be unwise, but if you can sort of faction them off, structure them off, so say have 3 basic plans, 3 middle plans, I'd say that you could do that. People will still go into the area that they want to. I don't know from a business point of view if it would make as much sense because if you have 3 basic plans and 3 middle ones and 3 premium ones, people will just go to the basic ones if they don't want to pay much money. But if you only have 3, they might be more likely to go for the middle one. There's a lot of psychological things that could happen there in terms of how much money people are willing to pay. So yeah, it's a big question, I guess. But I think the main point is that there's only so much that they compare at any one time. Yeah. Anything else? One more? Do we have time? Yeah, we use, well, at the Vodafone example, we exclusively used Google Analytics, although they're now moving into Omniture. But I don't know that much specifically about that product. I couldn't actually speak to that. But in that specific example, we used exclusively Google Analytics, and then we looked at internal search logs, although I'm, again, not sure of the products that were used. I work with an analyst who provides me with an analytics report, which is, wonderful, because I don't have to, I can still go in and look at the analytics, and I do on a week-by-week basis, but in terms of the deep analysis, she would provide me with that, and I would work with her on that and sort of figure out what things mean. And I think that's really, that's such a distinct skill in and of itself for a content analyst to have, to work with somebody who can piece through the data and analyze it is great. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.